Good morning. I'm Pete Najarian. This is the Take for Market Rebellion on a Thursday, Throwback Thursday. Got the Trade Monster shirt on for you. I got to tell you, these markets just continue to be very, very interesting. Yesterday, we had a market that had some pressure on it early, had a pretty nice range, about 350 points. Finished well off of the low ends of the range, but still in negative territory after having 3 days in a row where we had some pretty nice moves to the upside. And by the way, this was on very low volume yesterday. Something to think about, and I'll get into that in a second when we talk more about the volumes themselves. But coronavirus concerns certainly leading the storylines, I think, for yesterday. And if it's reflected right away, take a look at what was really getting pressure: travel and leisure. You look at Carnival Cruise, Norwegian, all of those down over 6.5% yesterday. You had Marriott hotels. You talk about hotels, talk about airlines. The airlines were all down about 2% or more. You had casinos as well. Wynn was down about 2% yesterday. So some pretty decent pressure in different areas of the marketplace, but not everything was going down yesterday. Then you look at the names that people do tend to go to, it seems like, when we are focused more on the negative side of the coronavirus and some of these areas where we're maybe seeing a little bit of a flare-up. So what are those names? Activision, Take-Two, EA Sports, all those names. But I'll tell you the one that continues to be very, very interesting, the semiconductor spot. I mean, when you look in this sector right now, and you look at NVIDIA and ASML and Lam Research, and we had Applied Materials yesterday moving as well, had some option activity in there as well. So when we see all of that, these are very close to their all-time highs. You look at the semiconductor index, the SMH, it is not too terribly far from all-time highs. So it's not like the entire market was absolutely getting pressured yesterday. There were certain areas and pockets that definitely stood out, but the areas that were dragging down the markets specifically was Boeing, Dow, Caterpillar. You look in the energy area with Exxon and Chevron and down about 2.5%, 3.5%, somewhere in that range. And financials, they've been sort of consolidating for a while now. If you just take a look over the last week, they've done nothing. But there's been movement in between over the last week. But generally, if you just go back a week or so and look at where was the XLF trading and where was it trading yesterday on the close, it's virtually almost unchanged. So that could be a positive because oftentimes you're looking for a consolidation period before maybe you make the next move. We'll keep an eye on that. Should be something to watch very closely. Volatility index yesterday, we had a pretty nice range. We were looking between 32 and 35, closed somewhere close to 33.5. And the other area that I think that doesn't get enough attention, and I've tried to bring it up more and more, especially recently, has been the biotech industry. When you look at what's going on with biotech and you look at, just take a look at the chart, take a look at where biotech is, very similar to the SMH, where everybody talks about the Power Five, the big five names. Well, they obviously have that big market cap, but there are other areas of the marketplace that have been participating, and this is a little bit more broad movement to the upside than has been reported, in my opinion, for a long period of time now, not just in the last couple days or week or two, but just take a look at the nice movement we've had. When you look at the biotech world, when you look at the semiconductors, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. This is not something that's just happening. This has been a broad participation. It just doesn't get reported on, I don't think, enough. So today, looking at the markets, they had a little bit of pressure in the pre-market. That continued into the start of the day. We were down close to 1% on the Dow. Pretty significant move. Down, call it 250 points, something like that. The S&P was also down about 0.75%. But dislocation once again. NASDAQ, relatively flat. So that was the start of the day. Now we're only 1 hour in. I wanted to come on a little bit early today just to give you a sort of a rundown of what we're seeing because it was a pretty dramatic flip. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you right now, I'm looking at it right in front of me. So we were down about 250. Right now, the Dow Jones is now in positive territory. Just barely, but 5 points higher. But nonetheless, a pretty significant move in the first hour of trade. NASDAQ really just kind of hanging where it was. It's not really moved up to the upside, so the performance levels now, it's almost exactly a dead heat. The Dow, the NASDAQ, the S&P, all almost exactly together, basically flat. Each and every one of them, none of them up more than 0.1% right now. So that gives you a little sense of the NASDAQ was the buoy, and then eventually we started to see this big pullback from a lot of those Dow stocks that were getting pushed to the downside. I'll give you a couple examples of that. So in the first hour, let's just take a look at Boeing. It's gone from 187 to 196. That's a pretty nice turnaround. You look at Chevron. I'm just going to pick out a couple of names. Chevron went from 90 to 92.5. JP Morgan went from 98 to 100.5. Gives you a sense of exactly what's going on right now. The volatility index was about 35 early on. when we were seeing some of that pressure. It's trading around 34 now as we've watched the markets kind of get back up on their feet and get towards the flat area. Now, I talked about volumes. The dip in volumes yesterday was pretty extraordinary, and I think that's worth highlighting because I've been talking about these volumes being extraordinary, and they continue to be. But yesterday, we were about 8 million contracts short of the June average, which is, call it about 34 million. So that's pretty significant in terms of the measurement of June. In terms of anything else, still an unbelievable number. But relative to what we've been seeing in the month of June so far, like I say, averaging 34 million, 8 million off of that, that's a pretty significant number. So what was buoying the markets when we looked over at the NASDAQ, and the NASDAQ was actually trading relatively flat with the rest of the markets getting pushed to the downside? Tesla, Zoom, PayPal, Microsoft, Apple, you kind of get the idea. A lot of those names, either the big tech type names or some of those names that a lot of people definitely are combining with whenever the coronavirus is something negative, these are the names that are going to move to the positive side. Specifically, I'm talking about Zoom. But Tesla's just been on a freak show run for a while now. Last I looked, it was well over 1,000 points and moving higher. So that's something that's just been an extraordinary stock. And I think a lot of people have just misinterpreted it for a very long period of time, saying it's a car company, saying it's a car company. And then everybody says, well, how can it possibly be bigger than Ford and bigger than GM? Because they've lost sight of the fact that it's much more. It is a car company to some extent, certainly, but that's the hardware. If I call it a tech company, which I do, that's the hardware. The vehicles are the hardware. Then there's the software component and the data that's collected. There are so many different components to this whole thing, the Gigafactory, all of that, that I think this is much more of a tech company, and they're delivering on that side of it with the autos, and that very much like an iPhone for Apple. Apple is a tech company, and they've got this great little shiny thing we call the iPhone that everybody's so addicted to, but there is so much more to Apple than that now, and we've watched that as that's moved and transformed over time into the services, into the wearables, into the app store, all of those various areas that more people are now starting to focus on, and they're understanding Apple more and more. And matter of fact, just last week, I saw a price target go up at around 400 for Apple. It gives you some sense. So early on, we had these markets were all getting pushed. We look at the healthcare, financials, industrials, they're all down about 1%. A lot of that has been recovered. We did slip back down into the red real briefly. Now, when I'm looking in the options world of everything that we've been looking at today so far, 1 hour in only, almost completely dominated by two different themes. One, extremely short term. Two, China. The names that are hitting today almost exclusively have been China names of companies based out of China. So that's something that definitely stood out for me. But that being said, there's more than just Chinese names, but that's the dominating theme. I'm going to go off of that, and I'm going to give you Salesforce. And here's why. Mark Benioff's been an absolute genius for a long period of time, generous guy as well. We all appreciate everything that he has done as a CEO and his leadership role as a CEO. But I got to tell you something. This company has been on fire. It's been moving to the upside, and there is some expectations that maybe there's even more movement to become, because the unusual that we're seeing today, stock was trading about 185.90, somewhere there. So call it 186, I guess. And we had buyers of the July 200. So you do get a little bit of time, not a lot of time, still short term, but you get a little bit of time with these July 200 calls, and they started buying them at about $1.80. And the highest I think that I saw on the prints as they were starting to explode to the upside was about 275. That's with the stock at 186, remember. So things do change rapidly. We all know that, depending on when you're watching and all the rest of that. But just as a highlight, I thought that really stuck out because we had all these different Chinese names, and many of them in the technology and the communication space. And then all of a sudden here we see something like a Salesforce.com. Love this company and the CEO, and it's amazing. So yes, I do own some of those calls. I jumped in as soon as I saw some of the buying going on there. So that's the full disclosure. Folks, have a great day of trading. Make sure you get educated. It's the most important thing you could do because this is the area of growth. When I refer to being off 8 million, that's still a huge number relative to any other year in the market. So it just gives you some sort of an idea of how strong things really are. But you've got to be educated, and you have to have that knowledge of the options, all the derivative products that there are. There's calls, there's puts, there's everything. So many different strategies that can be done. We've got some of the best educators, I think the best educators in the industry. Have a great day of trading, folks.